My name is Michael, and I am an experienced data analyst. I have worked for the same company for years, and over time, I have accumulated a series of professional achievements. However, what many don't know is that, behind these achievements, there is a silent battle that I fight daily. My boss, Kevin, has a habit of making insensitive jokes about my religion, and with every derogatory comment, I feel like I'm being stabbed. I clearly remember one particular day when Kevin made a particularly hurtful joke during a team meeting. "Hey Michael, do you think your faith can help us predict next quarter's numbers?" Everyone laughed, but I just smiled awkwardly, feeling a knot forming in my stomach. After the meeting, Sarah, a colleague from the marketing department, approached me. "Michael, are you okay?" she asked, with a genuine look of concern. "I am, Sarah. I'm just tired of it all," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. She nodded, understanding without me having to explain much. "If you need to talk, I'll be here." The truth is, I was exhausted. Every joke, every insensitive comment, accumulated inside me, forming a mountain of resentment and pain. I knew I needed to do something, but I didn't know where to start. It was then that I decided it was time to call it quits. One night, after another hard day at work, I sat down in front of the computer and started planning a way to unmask Kevin. I wanted to expose their prejudiced attitudes and, at the same time, promote a change in the company's culture. It wouldn't be easy, but I was determined. One of the nights I stayed late at the company, I found Sarah in the kitchen, getting a coffee. She looked exhausted, and something in her eyes made me think that maybe she was going through something difficult too. "Sarah," I began, hesitantly. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course, Michael." "What happened?" she replied, leaning against the counter and watching me carefully. I explained my situation, from Kevin's insensitive jokes to my decision to do something about it. To my surprise, she shared that she had also suffered discrimination at the company, but because of her sexual orientation. "You know, Michael, I'm tired of all this too. I've thought about leaving several times, but I like my job and I believe we can make a difference," she said, with determination in her eyes. "So why don't we do this together?" I suggested, feeling a new wave of hope. "We can work on a presentation that not only exposes Kevin, but also shows the need for us to change the company culture." Sarah smiled. "I'd love to. Let's do it." And that's how we started. We spent several nights working together, gathering evidence and creating an impactful presentation. Each graph, each anonymous testimonial we collected, reinforced our conviction that we were on the right path. Sarah brought a valuable perspective, and together, we formed an unbeatable team. "Michael, I think this statement is crucial. It clearly shows how Kevin's behavior affects the work environment," Sarah said, pointing to the computer screen. "I agree," I replied, writing down his observations. "The more evidence we have, the harder it will be for the board to ignore the problem." As our presentation took shape, I realized I was no longer alone. Sarah and I shared the same pain, the same outrage, and now, the same determination to change things. We knew the journey would be difficult, but we were ready to face it together. Finally, the day of the presentation approached. We felt a mix of nervousness and excitement, but we knew we were doing the right thing. We couldn't wait to expose the truth and begin a real transformation in the company. And so, with renewed courage and mutual support, we prepared to face the board and show that intolerance and prejudice would no longer have a place in our work environment. The battle was just beginning, but we were ready to fight. When I decided that enough was enough, I dove headfirst into the task of creating a presentation that could unmask Kevin and his prejudiced attitudes. I spent sleepless nights reviewing data, creating slides, and writing down every insensitive comment he had made over the years. I felt a responsibility to not only defend my dignity, but also that of all those who, like me, had been marginalized. One of these nights, while I was working in the conference room, I heard footsteps. I looked up and saw Sarah, a colleague from the marketing department, entering the room. "Michael, what are you doing here so late?" she asked, curious. "I'm working on something important, Sarah," I replied, hesitating for a moment before continuing. I'm preparing a presentation to expose Kevin and his prejudiced attitudes. She looked at me for a few seconds, as if pondering something. So he decided to sit next to me. "You're not alone," she said, with a tone of seriousness that surprised me. "I have also experienced discrimination here. Kevin made some horrible comments about my sexual orientation. I felt like I had nowhere to go. Those words hit me hard. Until then, I had no idea that Sarah was also a victim. It was as if a veil was lifted, revealing that I was not alone in this struggle. Sarah, I didn't know." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, trying to find the right words. "You know, I'm compiling all this, but I didn't think there was anyone else going through the same thing." She nodded, with a determined look. "We need to do this together. If you're willing, I'll share my experiences and help build this presentation. We can't let this continue." From that moment on, Sarah and I became a team. We shared our stories, each one more painful than the last, but with the conviction that we were doing the right thing. We began to meet other colleagues who had also suffered discrimination. It was as if each story we heard gave us more strength. "Michael, you have to listen to what John said," Sarah commented one day as we reviewed the statements. "He talked about how he was constantly ridiculed for his Asian origins. And then there's Emma, who went through terrible situations as a woman in a leadership role." "It just shows how deep the problem is," I replied, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. "It's not just about us. It's about everyone here." We worked tirelessly, night after night, gathering all the stories and evidence. We created graphics, prepared anonymous testimonials, and structured the presentation in a way that was impossible to ignore. Our mission was clear: expose intolerance and transform the company's culture. "Sarah, I think we're ready," I said, as we finalized the last details. "This presentation will not only expose Kevin, but also show the board that we need real change." She smiled, a smile of complicity and hope. "Let's do this, Michael. For all our sakes." Every slide, every graph, and every testimonial was a step towards a fairer and more inclusive company. And, despite our tiredness, we felt renewed energy, knowing that we were about to face the challenge of our lives, but with the conviction that truth and justice were on our side. When Sarah and I decided to collect accounts from other employees who had also faced discrimination at the company, we didn't know exactly where it would lead, but we were determined to make a difference. Initially, we created an informal support network where colleagues could share their experiences and find comfort. The idea was to provide a safe space, where everyone could speak without fear of reprisal. I remember one of the first meetings of this network. We were in a conference room at the end of the day, with the lights low and an atmosphere of complicity. "I never thought I would find a place where I could talk about this," said Joao, from the IT department, visibly moved. "I spent years hearing jokes about my Northeastern origin, and I always thought it was something I had to put up with to keep my job." The reports began to accumulate. Each new story reinforced the feeling that there was a systemic problem at the company, something much bigger than just Kevin and his insensitive jokes. Maria, from finance, shared that she was constantly underestimated because she was a woman in a predominantly male environment. Pedro, from the logistics sector, spoke about the difficulties of being a black man in a leadership position. It was clear that discrimination was ingrained in the company culture. "We need to do something," Sarah said, with a firmness I had never seen before. "It's not just about the two of us, it's about everyone who suffers in silence in here." As more and more stories emerged, we began documenting them anonymously. We created a database with these reports, ensuring that the identity of each participant was protected. At the same time, we started looking for more concrete evidence, such as emails, text messages, and any records that could prove discriminatory attitudes. "Michael, look at this." Sarah showed me an email exchange between two HR managers discussing how to avoid hiring people of certain ethnicities so you don't get into trouble later. That was a shock, but also a crucial starting point for our presentation. We decided it was time to take these stories to the next level. We set up meetings with some of the employees who had shared their most impactful experiences, asking for permission to use their stories, anonymously, in our presentation. Most agreed immediately, eager to see real change. "We trust you," said Anna from legal. "Do whatever it takes to make this stop." With the material in hand, we started working on the structure of the presentation. Sarah, with her marketing background, was essential in creating a compelling narrative. She created impactful slides, with graphics and statements that left no doubt about the seriousness of the situation. "We need to be careful not to turn this into a witch hunt," I said in one of our evening work sessions. "Our goal is to change the culture, not just punish Kevin." "I agree," Sarah replied. "But we also need to make sure people see the urgency of this change." We spent nights and weekends adjusting every detail. Every graph, every quote, every slide transition was meticulously reviewed. We wanted the presentation to be irrefutable, to leave the board with no choice but to act. Finally, we felt we were ready. We organized a final meeting with the support network participants to share what we had prepared. "What if nothing changes?" Lucas from customer service asked with a worried expression. "It'll change," I replied, trying to hide my own anxiety. "It has to change." Seeing the confidence in Sarah's eyes and feeling the silent support from everyone in the room, I knew we weren't just airing a problem. We were planting the seeds for a new organizational culture, one where everyone could feel respected and valued. While reviewing company documents, Sarah and I made a shocking discovery: there was a diversity and inclusion policy that had never been effectively implemented. It was like finding buried treasure, but instead of material riches, it was a set of guidelines that could completely transform the company's culture if taken seriously. "Sarah, look at this," I said, pointing to the document section. "We have a diversity and inclusion policy, but it's here, collecting dust. It's never been put into practice." Sarah leaned across my desk, her eyes wide with surprise. "This is unbelievable. How could something like this be ignored for so long?" "It's exactly what we need for our presentation." We spent the next few days immersed in these documents, reading each line carefully. The policy was robust, with clear guidelines on how to promote an inclusive, discrimination-free environment. It even had an action plan to deal with cases of prejudice and intolerance, something that, if it had been followed, would have prevented years of suffering for many of us. "This is perfect," Sarah commented at one of our evening meetings to work on the presentation. "We can show the discrepancy between what the company says it does and what it actually does. It will be impossible to ignore." I agreed with her. "Yes, and this will give even more weight to the testimonies we have collected. This is not just a matter of opinion, we are talking about a systemic failure to follow the company's own rules." We incorporated the diversity and inclusion policy guidelines into the presentation, highlighting each point and contrasting it with the reality we were experiencing. We created graphs, created tables, and included anonymous testimonies from employees who had suffered discrimination. The picture that formed was clear and disturbing. During one of our work sessions, Sarah paused and looked at me with a determined look in her eyes. "Michael, once we reveal this, there will be no going back. We need to be prepared for the consequences." I knew she was right. "I'm aware, Sarah. But we can't go on like this. We need to do this, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else who suffers in silence." She nodded. "That's right. Let's move on." With each revision, the presentation became more powerful. The policy guidelines, when contrasted with actual reporting, highlighted a glaring failure in the company's leadership. It was a time bomb ready to explode. A week before the presentation was scheduled to take place, we decided to hold a meeting with some of the employees who had shared their stories with us. We wanted to make sure everyone was aware of what was coming and that they were prepared for any backlash. "Are we ready for this?" one of the employees asked, concern evident in his voice. "Yes, we are," I replied firmly. "We have the truth on our side, and we have company policy which, despite being ignored, is on our side too." "It's now or never," Sarah added. "We need to change this toxic culture, and that starts with exposing the truth." The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose between us. we felt we were about to begin a necessary transformation and that, regardless of the immediate outcome, we were doing the right thing. The night before the presentation, I reviewed the slides for the last time. Every graphic, every statement, every point of the diversity and inclusion policy was there, ready to be shown. I knew the next day would be a turning point not just for me and Sarah, but for the entire company. We're ready, I said to myself. We are ready to change everything. The performance date is quickly approaching, and I can feel the tension building with each passing day. Sarah and I have been working tirelessly to make sure everything is perfect. We want every graph, every anonymous testimonial and every statistic to be aligned in a way that makes it clear how toxic the company culture has become. It is vital that our message is heard clearly and forcefully. Michael, do you think we should include that last discrimination story? Sarah asks as she adjusts one of the presentation slides. Yes, I think it's important to show the diversity of reports. Every voice matters, and this will further reinforce our point, I respond, feeling the urgency and gravity of the situation. The days leading up to the meeting are marked by sleepless nights and growing anxiety. Although we are nervous, we are also determined. We know we are doing the right thing. Sarah and I review each detail over and over again, and as the presentation takes shape, our confidence grows. Finally, the day of the presentation arrives. We entered the meeting room and felt the tension in the air. All the directors are present, including Kevin, who seems unconcerned, as if he has no idea what's coming. This only increases my determination. Let's get started, says the general director, motioning us to position ourselves at the front of the room. Sarah and I exchange an encouraging look, and then I begin the presentation. I start by talking about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the workplace, showing graphs and statistics that demonstrate how companies that adopt these practices are more successful. Next, Sarah presents the company's diversity policy, highlighting how it was never actually implemented. Now, we'd like to share some anonymous testimonials from employees who have faced discrimination here, I say, moving to the next slide. The room is completely silent as the statements are read. Every word carries the weight of our colleagues' painful experiences. I see Kevin shift uncomfortably in his chair, and it gives me the strength to continue. These reports are not isolated cases, Sarah adds. They point to a systemic problem within our company, a problem that starts at the top. Kevin is now visibly nervous, and the room becomes even more tense. We continue the presentation, detailing the prejudiced and intolerant attitudes he has exhibited over the years. Each fact is supported by testimonials and concrete evidence. We can no longer close our eyes to this reality, I say, ending my part of the presentation. We need real and immediate changes. When we finish, the room remains in a heavy silence. The directors exchange shocked looks, and finally the general director breaks the silence. Kevin, do you have anything to say in your defense? He asks, his voice thick with seriousness. Kevin stutters, tries to justify his actions, but it becomes clear that there is no defense possible. The board begins to question him pointedly, and he is unable to come up with a convincing answer. It is clear that we have failed to implement our own diversity and inclusion policy, says one of the directors. And this failure starts at the top. Starting today, we will establish a diversity and inclusion committee to investigate these allegations and work to improve our organizational culture. Michael and Sarah, you did an amazing job bringing these issues to light. We would like to invite you to be part of this committee, adds the general director. Kevin is suspended immediately while the investigation is ongoing, and Sarah and I are officially named members of the new Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The weight I carry on my shoulders feels a little lighter, knowing that we are finally taking a step in the right direction. We did it, Michael, Sarah says, smiling with relief. Yes, we did it, I reply, feeling a surge of hope and renewed determination. There is still a lot of work to be done, but we now know we are not alone. And, most importantly, we know that we are on the right path to transforming our company culture into an environment of respect and inclusion for everyone. On the day of the presentation, the tension was palpable. Sarah and I were ready, but we couldn't deny the nervousness we felt. It was a mix of anxiety and determination. After all, we were about to expose years of discrimination and intolerance that had taken root in the company's culture. As my coworkers settled into the conference room, I felt my stomach drop. Kevin was there, sitting in his usual chair, with a confident expression that got on my nerves. Little did he know that, within minutes, his arrogant stance would be challenged. Sarah and I exchanged a knowing look before starting. I took a deep breath and started to speak. Good morning, everyone. Today, Sarah and I prepared a presentation that we believe is extremely important for the future of our company. We are going to talk about discrimination and intolerance in the workplace, something that, unfortunately, has been recurring here. As I progressed through the first few slides, the room gradually fell silent, a heavy, almost palpable silence. Kevin began to realize that the presentation was not just about generic policies, but rather about specific actions, many of which he had taken himself. I'd like to share some personal experiences, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. For years, I was the target of insensitive jokes and bigoted comments about my religion. These comments, made repeatedly by my boss, Kevin, not only deeply affected me, but also created a hostile work environment. Kevin's eyes widened. He began to sweat, realizing he was in a sticky situation. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, trying to intervene. "You're exaggerating, Michael." Sarah chimed in, remaining calm. "We're not exaggerating, Kevin. And it's not just Michael. I've also experienced discrimination because of my sexual orientation. And we're not the only ones." She changed the slide and showed graphs and anonymous testimonials from other employees who had gone through similar experiences. These are reports from our colleagues. This is a systemic problem. The board members, who until then had just been observing, began to show surprise and indignation. The director of operations, Mr. Thompson, raised his hand, asking for the floor. "Michael, Sarah, these are very serious allegations. Do you have any further proof?" "Yes, Mr. Thompson," I replied. "We have email logs, message screenshots, and detailed testimonials from multiple employees. Additionally, upon reviewing company documents, we discovered that there is a diversity and inclusion policy that has never been effectively implemented. We are using these guidelines to show the discrepancy between what is on paper and what happens in practice." Kevin was visibly uncomfortable. He tried to justify himself. "This is a misunderstanding. I never intended to offend anyone." "Intent doesn't matter as much as impact, Kevin," I replied, remaining calm. "The fact is that his actions have caused pain and suffering to many of us." Sarah continued. "We need a change. We can no longer tolerate this type of behavior. We are here to ask the board to take concrete steps to improve the company's culture." Mr. Thompson looked at the other directors and then at us. "We will establish a diversity and inclusion committee to investigate these allegations and improve organizational culture. Michael and Sarah, we would like you to serve on this committee, recognizing your efforts to expose the truth." Kevin was silent, knowing he was in trouble. "Kevin, you are suspended while the investigation is ongoing," Mr. Thompson announced. As I left the room, I felt a huge weight lifted from my shoulders. Sarah and I hugged each other, knowing we had taken an important step toward making the company a better place. Our fight was far from over, but that day marked the beginning of a true cultural revolution within the company. As the presentation progressed, I felt a mix of nervousness and determination. Sarah and I were finally exposing the truth that so many of our peers had suffered in silence. The conference room was packed, and all eyes were on us. "As you can see," I began, pointing to a chart showing a series of anonymous testimonials, "it's not just Sarah and I who face discrimination here. There is a clear pattern of intolerant behavior that has been ignored for far too long." Sarah continued, "These reports show that our company culture is poisoned by prejudice. Here we have testimonies from employees who have been ridiculed for their religious beliefs, sexual orientation, and other personal characteristics." The board was visibly shocked. I could see the looks of disbelief on their faces. Kevin, on the other hand, was nervous. He began to sweat and shift restlessly in his chair. "That's ridiculous," he interrupted, trying to maintain his composure. "These are just personal opinions and do not reflect the company's reality." I looked directly at him and responded, "Kevin, these are not just isolated cases. These are repeated patterns of behavior that show a toxic and discriminatory work environment. And what's more serious is that the company's diversity and inclusion policy was never implemented effectively." One of the board members, Mr. Oliveira, who was known for his seriousness and fairness, leaned forward and asked, "Kevin, can you explain to us why these policies were never put into practice?" Kevin started to stutter. I didn't know there were that many problems. Maybe there was a misunderstanding or a miscommunication." Sarah interjected, "It's not a matter of misunderstandings. It's a matter of negligence and, frankly, bad faith. We've reviewed the company documents and it's clear that the diversity and inclusion policy is only on paper. There is no real initiative to promote it." Mr. Oliveira looked at the other board members and said, "This is unacceptable. We cannot allow our company to continue like this. We need immediate change." Another director, Ms. Martins, added, "I completely agree. We need to investigate these allegations and take steps to change the organizational culture. Kevin, your attitude is extremely concerning and we will need a more detailed explanation of your conduct." Kevin was visibly uncomfortable. "I'll do my best to cooperate," he said, but his tone showed he knew he was in a sticky situation. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Finally, our voices were being heard. Sarah and I exchanged a look of relief, but we knew there was still a lot of work to be done. Mr. Oliveira announced, "We will establish a diversity and inclusion committee to investigate these allegations and take corrective action. Michael and Sarah, you have shown great courage in bringing these issues to light. We would like you to be part of this committee to ensure that changes, real ones, are implemented." Sarah and I nodded, accepting responsibility. Kevin was told he would be suspended while the investigation was ongoing. As I left the conference room, I felt a mix of emotions. We were just at the beginning of a long journey to transform the company's culture, but we had finally taken the first step. I knew my fight would be worth it, and I was determined to see this change through to the end. That day was a milestone in my life. After years of suffering in silence, I finally felt like my voice was being heard. The board met in a large room, serious expressions on their faces. Kevin, my boss, was there. His skin was paler than I had ever seen it. It was the day that the Diversity and Inclusion Committee would be established, and I, together with Sarah, would finally have the chance to transform the company's culture. "Michael, Sarah, we want to thank you for your hard work and courage in bringing these issues to light," said the company president, a gray-haired, steady-eyed woman named Helena. "Starting today, you will be part of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. We need committed people like you to ensure that our company becomes a more fair and respectful environment for everyone." Sarah and I exchanged a look of relief and determination. We knew the journey was just beginning, but this was a big step. Helena continued, "Kevin, you will be suspended while the investigation is ongoing. Your actions and lack of implementation of diversity and inclusion policies are unacceptable." Kevin didn't say a word. He just hung his head, defeated. For the first time, I felt that justice was being served. After the meeting, Sarah and I met in the company cafe to discuss next steps. "Michael, this is just the beginning. We need to ensure that the committee is not just a formality, but rather a real agent of change," said Sarah, as she took a sip of her coffee. "I agree," I replied, stirring my tea. "We need to listen to employees, understand their concerns, and create policies that really make a difference. And most of all, we need to make sure those policies are implemented." The following week, we began organizing meetings with employees to hear their stories and suggestions. Each report was a piece of the puzzle that showed the company's true culture. We discovered that many employees, like Sarah and me, had experienced discrimination and prejudice but were afraid to speak out. At one of these meetings, a young woman named Anna shared her experience. I always felt left out because I was the only woman on my engineering team, she said, her voice breaking. The sexist comments and jokes were constant. I thought about quitting every day. We're here to change that, Anna, I assured her. We want to create an environment where everyone feels respected and valued. Your voice matters. As reports accumulated, it became clear that the company's culture needed a complete overhaul. We began working on a comprehensive plan, which included diversity and inclusion training, zero-tolerance bias policies, and the creation of safe reporting channels. Helena gave us full support. We need to be a company where everyone feels welcome and respected, she said at one of the committee meetings. Michael, Sarah, I trust you to lead this transformation. Over time, we started to see real changes. The training helped raise awareness among employees about the importance of diversity and mutual respect. The new policies were rigorously implemented, and the work environment began to improve. Kevin, on the other hand, was still suspended. The investigation revealed more questionable practices on his part, and he was eventually fired. The company initiated legal proceedings against him for embezzling funds and manipulating data. Justice was being served. Sarah and I were promoted to leadership roles, tasked with ensuring the new culture of respect and inclusion was maintained. We felt that our struggle had been worth it. The company transformed into a place where everyone felt valued and respected. And finally, I could work without fear, knowing that my voice and the voices of many others were being heard. The creation of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee was a significant milestone for our company, and I can proudly say that I was a crucial part of this change. From the beginning, we knew it wouldn't be an easy transition, but we were determined to transform the organizational culture into something more inclusive and respectful. In the early days of the committee, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. We had a mission to reverse years of discriminatory practices and implement policies that had never been implemented. Sarah and I met frequently to discuss our strategies. At one of these meetings, she commented, "Michael, we have to start with training. We need to educate people about diversity and inclusion. Many don't even know that certain behaviors are harmful." I agreed immediately. We began to develop a detailed training plan, which included workshops, lectures, and discussion sessions. We wanted all employees to have the chance to learn and understand the importance of diversity. It wasn't just about complying with a policy, it was about changing mindsets. The first training sessions were intense. It was clear that many were uncomfortable, but participation was high, which was a good sign. I led some sessions and took the opportunity to share my own experience. Telling my story served as a catalyst for others to open up. At one of these workshops, a colleague, Joao, raised his hand hesitantly. "Michael, I never knew my comments could be offensive. I always thought it was just a joke. How can I improve?" I answered honestly. "Joao, the first step is to recognize the impact of your words. The second is to listen more and talk less. Ask the people around you how they feel and be open to change." These moments were transformative. Little by little, we began to see genuine changes. Diversity and inclusion policies were updated, and now, they were more than words on paper. They were concrete actions. We established an anonymous reporting channel so employees could report any type of discrimination without fear of retaliation. One of the highlights was when we organized a round table with the board to discuss progress. The company's president, Mr. Almeida, made a point of recognizing our work. "Michael, Sarah, what you have done here is extraordinary. We are seeing a real change in the company's culture, and this is thanks to your commitment." Sarah, visibly moved, replied, "Mr. Almeida, this is just the beginning. We still have a lot to do, but it is comforting to see that we are on the right path." Sarah and I's story began to spread throughout the company as an example of courage and determination. Other employees began to feel encouraged to speak out against prejudice. I remember a conversation with Anna, from the IT department. "Michael, I've always been afraid to talk about what I went through here. But after seeing you and Sarah, I feel stronger." "Thanks." Those words meant the world to me. Seeing that our struggle was inspiring others was confirmation that we were doing the right thing. We also implemented a mentoring program, where experienced employees helped new employees adapt to the inclusive culture we were building. Over time, the company really started to change. The work environment became lighter, more respectful. People began to feel valued for who they were, regardless of their religion, sexual orientation, or any other characteristic. It was a true cultural revolution. Today, I look back and see how far we have come. Of course, there are still challenges, but I am more confident than ever that we are on the right path. The company has transformed into a place where everyone can feel safe and respected, and that is a victory we share every day. The story of Michael and Sarah is not just about two individuals, it's about the collective strength of a company that decided to no longer accept prejudice. And that's a battle worth fighting. During the investigation, we discovered something even more disturbing about Kevin. Sarah and I were reviewing some financial documents, trying to understand if there was anything else that could explain his abusive behavior. "Sarah, this doesn't look right," I commented, pointing to an expense report. "These numbers don't match the records we have." She approached, frowning as she analyzed the data. "You're right, Michael. It looks like someone messed with those numbers. And I have a strong suspicion as to who it might have been." With this clue, we started to dig deeper. We spent sleepless nights, reviewing every detail, every transaction, every document. And with each new discovery, it became clearer, Kevin was not only a prejudiced and insensitive boss, but he was also involved in illegal practices. "Michael, look at this," Sarah exclaimed one night, pointing to a series of emails we had managed to recover. He was diverting company funds to personal accounts. And that's not all. He was also manipulating data to cover up these diversions. "My God, this is really serious," I replied, feeling a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at what Kevin was doing and relief that we finally had concrete evidence to put an end to this once and for all. We took all this new evidence to the board. Their reaction was pure shock and outrage. "I can't believe this was happening right under our noses," said one of the directors, shaking his head in disbelief. Kevin was immediately suspended while the investigation was further investigated. But with the evidence we gathered, it wasn't long before he was formally fired and faced legal action for embezzlement and data manipulation. In recognition of our hard work and our courage in exposing not only prejudice, but also corruption within the company, the board decided to promote us. Sarah and I were elevated to leadership roles, tasked with ensuring the new culture of respect and inclusion was maintained. "Michael, you deserve this," Sarah said, smiling as she shook my hand after the meeting where we received news of the promotions. "We both deserve it." "Yes, Sarah. Finally, we can make a real difference," I replied, feeling a rush of satisfaction and hope. "Now, it's our responsibility to make sure no one else goes through what we went through." With our new positions, we began to implement a series of changes in the company. We carried out training on diversity and inclusion, reviewed and updated internal policies and created secure channels for employees to report any form of discrimination or irregularities. The transformation was remarkable. The company began to become a place where everyone felt valued and respected. And the most rewarding thing of all was seeing how our story inspired other employees to speak out against prejudice and fight for a fairer and more inclusive work environment. One day, while walking through the company corridors, I was approached by a colleague. "Michael, I just wanted to say thank you. You and Sarah have changed this place for the better. Now I feel like I can be myself here." Those words meant the world to me. I knew our fight had been worth it. And, above all, I knew we were on the right path to building an organizational culture based on respect, equality, and inclusion. And with Sarah by my side, I was confident that we could face any challenge that lay ahead.